Uh, so last week there was a question. We had a forgiveness meditation and talked about forgiveness. Sometimes I think we can't do that often enough to forgive ourselves for our imperfections and mistakes, and to not hold the past against each other in different ways that we do. And then there was a question, interesting question, toward the end of our time together. Oh, and see, we have a guest who's young. Hi. I didn't hear your name because my mic was being adjusted when we went around. Can you tell? Oh, I know. There's so many people. Winton, welcome. You can hide and you can stand up, and I promise I won't call attention to you anymore. I'm just happy you're here. Somebody asked a question about how the different, because we moved from forgiving ourselves in interpersonal matters to talking about more cultural and societal things, and just naming the way that we get separated and segregated from each other, naming who's in the room and who isn't in the room. I'm happy that there are more young people in the room now. It seemed for a while that because I'm old, everybody old was coming. And I mean, we feel comfortable with our age group. There's no question. But, you know, I want all generations to feel welcome, and that it's important for you too. And, you know, obviously all colors and all gender identifications and all levels of ability. We do have a lift that goes up the stairs. So if you have trouble walking up the stairs or walking at all, there is a lift. But somebody asked a question, so we started to talk about some of those things, and then the question arose, well, what about the fact that everything kind of overlaps with everything else? And when we look at issues of poverty, then we look at economic injustice, and we look at racial injustice, and then we look at other forms of societal injustice, and how do we know what to do in the face of all of this and the way everything kind of intersects or overlaps? And I want to just give a shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality to talk about this. And the dictionary definition of that term, which I want to offer, because it seems as though, you know, we get these really useful words and then they can become weaponized in our polarized discussions. But the dictionary definition is the complex cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, racism, sexism, classism, we can say ageism, ableism, etc., combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. So that's the definition of intersectionality. And I bring it up because these words and frames really matter, because they help us see things. Just like when we look at the 4 foundations of mindfulness, it's not that experience is all segmented into those 4 things. It's that by naming them, we are able to deconstruct our experience and learn about it in a way that would be harder if we don't. It's just a lot coming at us, and we have our habits of perception and thinking, and it's hard to even see them if we don't have a way to begin to analyze and separate and name what's happening. So intersectionality also helps us understand, again, these structures of power that enable oppression in our society. They're very fluid and they're very interconnected. And we're going to talk about interconnection and interdependence from the perspective of our practice too. But they're very fluid, they're very interconnected. But by naming some of the frames and ways that we look at things, we can begin to see some of the interactions um, and how and what underpins them. And that's necessary in order to change them. We can't change what we don't even know about or see. And that's why I'm always devoting my life to mindful awareness, loving awareness, 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 awareness. We all have blind spots. They are conditioned by our upbringing, by our physical perceptual apparatus as humans. Um, we have blind spots, and only awareness and each other, pointing things out to each other and together, can help us see what they are. And the importance of that is because anything that we leave out of awareness, either deliberately or unconsciously, unintentionally, is also out of our power or control. We can't do anything about it because we can't see it or know about it. So anything that we decide isn't part of our mindfulness practice, for example, oh, I can be mindful about my interactions and about my many aspects of my life, but then I'm going to set aside, for example, one area. Uh, let's just say eating. I don't have to be too mindful about that. I eat a lot of healthy food, so what the heck? I don't have to be too mindful about that. So, but then everything that has to do with that, I don't want to go off too far into that example. You understand what I'm saying. I know you do. I don't want to get sidetracked because this is sort of complex to put together for me, and I'm just sharing some of the thoughts and feelings that I've been having this week about it. So intersectionality addresses some of the, I would call them social stratifiers in our society, the things that I was naming, like race, ethnicity, nationality, gender identification, class, sexuality, geography, age, disability. Geography is a big one in LA. Have you ever heard the expression geographically undesirable? When I first moved here, I was so shocked. I made my first friend and I was like, let's get together. And she said, where do you live? And I said, I live on the west side. This was where my mom was, and I needed help take care of her. So I was over here. And she said, I'm sorry, you're GU. And it's like, I did Georgetown University. Like, I just didn't, you know what that means, geographically undesirable. Anyway, migration status, religion, there's just so many categories and ways that we stratify each other, but they also become a basis for inequities, unjust things to happen. And so, how do we handle, seeing the complexity of all of this? How can we begin to deal with, like, what can we do? What can any one of us do? And I found this quote from a New Englander of the 19th century that you may know, and it says, I guess it's a famous quote. Jack said it's a famous quote, but I hadn't heard it. It says, I am only one. That's true for each of us. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. Does that make sense? So I think that's really important, because when we feel like, oh my God, it's so fluid and complicated and interrelated, and which string do I pull, and how can I be of benefit? My friend Anam Tupten, I think I mentioned last week, wrote a new book called Choosing Compassion, and I love the subtitle. It's how to be of benefit in a world that needs our love. And so this is really an antidote to despair, because we can start to feel overwhelmed and kind of despairing. Like, what difference can I make as one person? What difference can you make as one person? And, Joanna Macy, in the last century, did really beautiful work called From Despair to Empowerment. And I think this quote can help us just very simply move from despair to empowerment, to understanding I am only one, but still I am one. And just because I can't do everything, I won't refuse to do the something that I can do. And I remember feeling when I came back from Eastern Chad, right by Sudan, when I had been at teaching mindfulness in the Darfuri refugee camps. And the problems are so overwhelming, and people are hungry for starters. They just don't have enough food. So they're malnourished. Too many of the children have orange hair, which means, they're not getting protein. Their development will be stunted. This is the next generation. People get sick because they're malnourished, and there isn't any medical care, which is scary when you go there. We had to bring every bite of food we were going to eat because there just isn't any if you don't bring it, except the little bit that they have, and share, of course, generously. But I remember feeling that feeling of like, what can I do? Where is mindfulness on the hierarchy of needs when you're hungry? Well, it turns out that of all the trainings that we were doing, and we were helping train the refugees who are running their preschool programs and their soccer programs in mindfulness, it turns out of all the trainings, they love mindfulness the best. They loved it. It helped them stay with just what is and not catastrophize about the future. And it helped them when they had flashbacks to their trauma from the genocide they were fleeing. They loved mindfulness. So we don't, we don't know what the impact is of what we might do, and it might be way more than we think it is. And how this intersects with our practice, we talk about interdependence and interconnection, and how we're not really all so separate, that when we look at things from the universal perspective, we're all the same. Of course, individually, we're all unique. We have our causes and conditions for who we are. But as humans, we're pretty much more the same. And it turns out with primates too. And I think we're going to discover with more and more species, our commonality is more than our difference. And so we talk about these things, the web of causes and conditions, in our own practice. It's a kind of systems theory of the mind and heart. And when we talk about interdependence, we also talk about a teaching called dependent origination. How many of you have heard of this teaching in Buddhism? It's a Buddhist teaching, which basically says one thing leads to another. That's the very simple encapsulation of it, but it's really a teaching about how we perceive things, and there's like 12 links of perception, and basically how we create suffering in our lives. And then there's a teaching called transcendent dependent origination, which takes the whole process and reverses it, and then that's how we create freedom and liberation in our lives. And I will talk about it next week, because it's a big teaching in and of itself. But the way that it's taught in this tradition is very much internal and personal. How the way that I perceive, I must be hungry. I keep having food examples coming into my mind. I might perceive, let's just say an apple. I'm imagining I have one, that there's an apple in my hand. So I might perceive the apple, and that perception creates, if I cling to that perception, oh, how pretty it is. It looks so sweet and delicious. In fact, I'm going to turn it into an apricot, a fresh apricot, because they're in season now. And then that creates craving to eat the apple. And then the pleasant sensation, actually, it's the pleasant sensation that creates the craving for more. Anyway, it's a very circular process, and we can see it in simple ways, but it's very personal and individual. It's like what happens when we see things, when we cling to things, when we crave things. It's very helpful when we're working to be in recovery and looking at how addiction works. All of this is very, very helpful. But when we look at how interconnection or interdependence, how it happens between us, it's not really addressed by this teaching. It's not a relational teaching, except relationship with ourselves. And I think the understanding is that as we free our hearts and understand more and more deeply what makes us tick and how one thing in our experience leads to another, and so we get to make wiser choices about that one thing, knowing where it's going to lead, we get along better with each other. But that actually, in these teachings, has to do with karma, which means action. We think karma means everything's predestined. Oh, it's my karma. It's always going to be like this. But it actually just means action. But if you think about taking an action, that will affect what happens next, right? And so these teachings they're linked. How we treat each other, how we act toward each other has consequences. And we see that our intention, as I pointed out last week in our list of agreements for multicultural conversations, our intention may be good, but the impact of what we do may not be so good. And as we understand these things more and more, we understand karma. And understanding karma is an optimistic teaching, because it really means that there's endless possibilities for how we might act in any given moment, and so we get to choose. There's another teaching, you might have heard the word emptiness too. There's another teaching. That's a terrible word for what it's really saying, because what it's really saying is this is an infinite field of possibility that we're in together. And emptiness really, it does mean it's more about interdependence. The word emptiness suggests nothingness or void, and there are experiences like that in meditation that we can have, but nothing exists in a vacuum. Everything has a context. We have a context for our life and for our feelings. And the context that we live in, the set of circumstances, our life situation, they're always changing and shifting, aren't they? I remember in my 20s, I was so focused on finding a place to live, finding a job, finding a partner, or at least somebody to have fun with, and I couldn't seem to get them all at the same time. Like I'd find a place to live, but then my job turned out to be unsatisfactory, or I'd find a good job, but then the landlord raised the rent, we had to move, or it just seemed like, but that's how it is. It's always shifting in our experience. And so when we talk about emptiness, we really just mean that you can't pin it down and define it once and for all, that things are shifting and contexts are shifting. But this is something that can give us hope and make us feel good, because it's referring to the fact that there are always possibilities and we can start right where we are. We often think we have to have more money, or we have to have whatever it is, more, better, different, in order to start whatever it is that we want to start. But we can start right where we are, because there is really a boundless, open range of possibilities. The more we become aware of our fixed patterns of perception and can free our hearts from that, the more possibilities that we can have and know and see. So the good news is that anything can happen anytime. Anything can come into being because there's no fixed way that things stay or have to be. It all depends on the conditions that come together. And that really gives us the possibility of changing, um, working to change, whether it's the interconnected structures of power that create, social marginalization, or whether it's just changing how it is for our own hearts, moving from the grief we may feel about what's happening in our world, either personally or around us, in the current government that we have, shifting from the grief that we feel to action and to the optimism that we can actually transform things, that it's possible for us. Yesterday was the anniversary. Was it yesterday, the anniversary? Yeah, and I remember, of course, many of you are old enough to remember in this room when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon for the first time. And I found a poem, and I'm just going to read you the end of it because I liked it. It says, "A man was about to walk on the moon." I mean, talk about thinking things are impossible, and then they happen with tremendous intention and group effort and so forth. "A man was about to walk on the moon, say something universal enough to allow all people to share the triumph, no matter their language. And Armstrong did it, pushed out of the eagle, took the first step, spoke. And there we were, applauding, as if he could hear us, as if there were no distance between us and the moon, no borders against human progress." Reflecting back 50 years later, I am struck by how much optimism and hope we felt then, and that some of that optimism and hope has been eclipsed by the events of today, or this past week, I could say. But still, we can achieve things across borders, the borders of each other and the borders of our countries. And I'm sure that many of the scientists who worked on the Apollo mission, oh, this makes me cry. I'm sure they were immigrants. We know that many of the scientists we know thanks to that wonderful movie, I forget the name, that many of them were Black women who never got named or celebrated at the time. But now, thanks to our loving awareness and our mindfulness practice, we can begin to name and know more and more what makes us tick and how we can be of benefit in a world that needs our love. So these are some thoughts I just want to share with you this morning. And now we open up for some conversation. For those of you who are new, we have, chance for questions or things you might want to share from your own practice, your own meditation. And for our live stream friends, we invite you to just type in a question, and Angela, who is taking care of our live stream, will read it to me. So I see that Karen has a question.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. Intersectionality is something I think about a lot. I do full-time animal rights activism, and I just have to share, when you were singling out Winton, it brought back the most beautiful memory of Winky and I. We go everywhere together, and we were invited to Washington, D.C. to see a play about Jane Goodall, and it was the opening night.
I don't know if Winton can see who Winky is.
Winky
dog
is
over
a
here.
Beautiful he's a canine person.
Right there.
Here.
Can you
can come say Winky Smalls. You can come say hello to him.
He's friendly.
He's very friendly. Well, that's funny. He's not. He's standoffish. But I'm about to get most
Well,
of you
then he
know
won't
that.
bite.
God no. And we were when we flew across. Do you want to? That's Winky Smalls. This is Winton, Winky. He says, I'm just. Oh, she's cute. Yeah, yeah. She's yeah, yeah, yeah. We were invited to Washington, D.C. to see a play about Jane Goodall. And it was the opening night, and Jane Goodall was there. And after the play, she got up to address at the party. All the folks were there. And the first thing she said, hello, and thank you for being here. And she did what you do with the wind. She said, I'm so excited that there's a dog here. And she got down, and Winky went straight up to her and started licking her face, which for those of you who know her, he does not do. And it was just such a beautiful moment. And what you said to Winton about being so happy that there were young people there, I think Jane was so excited that it wasn't simply 100% human gathering.
Yes.
It was like, oh, and there was like, yes. Oh, well, he's like, I know, she's from my planet.
Winky represents the whole non-human world in this
and
room.
Being a pit bull who I sort of got by accident, he also represents the particularly oppressed and
a marginalized species.
Exactly. He's not only you get it.
Yeah.
Your talk touched me so greatly. There's a line that has been bouncing around in my head all week, which it's not the sort of thing I would ever write on a bumper sticker. But my friend Paul Watson, he says anything and he doesn't worry how it will offend people. And I do worry about offending people greatly. But in this room, I think people will understand it in the way it was meant, which is, he says, he's Paul Watson's the guy who goes out and attacks he defends the whales from the Japanese whalers. And he says, if you wonder where you would have stood on slavery in the 1800s, look at where you stand on animal rights now.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
I think in this room, people might be able to start to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for saying, may all beings be happy and free. Free.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Winky.
Hi, guys. First of all, I can't thank you enough for your Dharma talk. It was very important to me and touched my heart. And I have to say that I was really traumatized this week and stood in my kitchen with tears when they were yelling, send her back. I said, wait a minute, are they really saying this? Am I hearing this right?
Unbelievable.
I can't really be hearing this. It's like, excuse me, but what the fuck? I mean, I'm like, and yeah, we work to make change and we work to, reach out and touch people and all that. But I just had to share, guys. I'm just blown away by this and I'm so sad. And I know there's goodness in this room and in the people that I hang out with and the people I meet. And yet it scares the hell out of me. And I don't want to live in fear. That's not where I'm coming from. But your talk was so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wonder if we could turn down the air conditioning a little bit. It's getting really cold in here. And maybe, just turn it off, please. I'm not saying it's anybody's fault. It's just getting cold.
I have one more thing. I have a movie.
Oh.
The Maiden. The first group of women who got it together to sail around the world. Original film clips, everything they encountered or their challenges, and you meet all of them today. And it is inspiring and uplifting and brilliant, especially today.
Oh, I forgot your movie from last week. What was it?
The Farewell.
Oh, okay.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for asking. I was a movie critic in my last life.
Thank you. While we're talking about movies, I want to give a shout out too, because I'm wearing my Ace of Cups t-shirt, And this is this is a great, great story. My dear friend here, she's really my dear friend here in LA, Denise Kaufman, started the first all-girl rock and roll band in the 60s. Now there were great all-girl R&B bands, but this was the first rock and roll band and the first white girl band. But don't worry, they didn't get attention either. Uh, just being white wasn't enough. Although they did get to play with, Jefferson Airplane and all the great bands of that day, Jimi Hendrix, et cetera, et cetera. But they never got to make an album, and they never got played on the radio because women weren't allowed to say the stuff that they were saying. It was sort of punky, some of their songs, some of them not. But the cool thing is that they kept. I mean, they all had went on to have different jobs. Denise became a yoga teacher and a surfer. The drummer became a cleaning lady. One person went to social work school. Anyway, they went on to different lives, but they kept making music. And uh, when Wavy Gravy, who was a activist clown, when he had his big, I can't remember if it was his 70th birthday celebration or 80th. Anyway, I guess 70th. Can't really remember. When Wavy had his big birthday, they played, and in the audience was a rock and roll producer aficionado who thought, who are these women? And basically has funded their making their first album. They're in their 70s. Half of them are grandmothers. It's just to see them rocking out yesterday at the Venice Beach Music Festival. Heidi was there. It was so, did you stay for their set? It was so fun and so joyful. And, they aren't, well, Diane, like me, colors her hair. I mean, I'm sorry, in LA, there's just something in the water. We don't get white hair. But most, they've got like white hair. They're rocking out. It's so fantastic. It just so changes our idea of what a grandmother is or should look like. Yeah, like you. And yes, yes. It's one of the miracles of our practice, right? That it stayed that color. Um, anyway, they have an album. You can go on their website, Ace of Cups, best card in the tarot deck, and you can hear a little of their music and see them. I just think it's a very uplifting story when there's so many that are not uplifting, like what happened this past week. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I particularly appreciate you mentioning Joanna Macy, who in the 1980s was pivotal in my own transformation. I saw her do a workshop. I participated in a workshop on fear, hope, and empowerment in the nuclear age.
Oh, yeah.
And she and Pema Chodron are the kindest people I've ever met. I mean, they just bring me to tears. And she got me out of this incredibly stuck place I had for most of my life, being frozen of fear of nuclear war. I mean, it was a transformative experience. Not that I'm not still scared, but
you know what to do with that fear now.
Yeah, it's if anybody does not know about her, she started the whole movement of enlightened Buddhism.
Socially engaged.
Social engaged Buddhism. So, I still, for us highly sensitive types, if anybody ever read Elaine Aron on the highly sensitive person, some of us are like triggered every single day by the news. My mission right now seems to be calling out the trolls on left-wing Facebook things like Robert Reich, and calling them out and making a plea for kindness in the way we talk to each other. Because even those progressive people tend to get into the same name calling and ugliness. And I just feel like that's a little thing I can do, even though I get attacked. But, just calling out hate and also the isms, particularly for me, body shaming, is really, really important to just call it out when we see it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the lovely Dharma talk. So you mentioned that the fact that we can't do everything shouldn't keep us from doing the thing that we can do. And to that end, I've been encouraging people, especially women, to run for public office. Except for the people who've been professional politicians in Congress right now, basically everybody else at some point never thought that would be them. And so if you have never thought that would be you, well, maybe it's time to reconsider. To that end, I'm offering to train anyone who wants to run for public office in public speaking. So I'm a public speaking coach. I have an online course. If you prove to me that that's what you're doing, then I will hook you up with my course. It's called Super Charisma, how to be a transformative speaker. And
Thank you.
this is power, and I
Thank
want you to
you.
be powerful.
Thank you. What's your name? I can't read your name tag.
Oh, Ali Benazir.
Thank you very much. Wow. Okay. Who's going to take him up on it? Carol, you could. You could.
Carol's the president.
Okay, there's more people back here. Yeah.
I just, to take us back to the primate biologist world, Diane Fossey, when she came out of the jungle after, what was it, 2 or 3 years, living with the apes, was obviously the first question was, why you? Why did they let you live with them and not anybody else? And she said something that I've really incorporated into my practice, like you were, the whole element of kindness to yourself. And she said the first thing is, I didn't bring a gun. And I always think of that when I'm doing my own work and my own meditation, is don't bring a gun. And to sit with kindness and to sit with humor. How easy it is to get aggressive, like, you're saying online with trolls, but I'll get that way much more quickly with myself than I will with anybody else. And I think about, I just think about that a lot. Don't bring a gun.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Oh, you next. Then you.
Hi.
Okay.
I am so grateful to you and Jack, and for what you have accomplished here. I've been coming here with my wife for the last 2 years, and it's so beautiful. Paradoxically, I started to realize the things that attachment and control. I thought they were really source of power for me. But I realize now it is really the source of my anxiety, my grief, and my sadness and my anger. And the more I just try to get rid of this attachment and this control that thinks to be my way all the time, which is silly.
Well, it just doesn't work. If it worked, it would be fine.
Well, it has worked. It did work for some times, or I thought it did work.
Right.
But on the other hand, there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger associated with it. So it's not really the most enlightened way to live one's life. So it's start to really peel off the source of control and attachment, which to me, attachment really control, because you want things your way and only your way.
Exactly.
Not willing to let things the way they are. And the more I start to just flow along and let things to be the way they are, I became more happier, or at least more comfortable within my skin. It takes a lot of work, but if I realize that at least 10% of the time, I am really good for it. And thank you for what you've done. And it's a wonderful thing.
Thank you. That's a beautiful story. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I guess it's on. I wanted to share a story since we're on the topic of intersectional kind of stuff. I was on my way home from Spain on a flight where I stopped in London, and in front of me were these three white women, and they were talking. They were racist. One of them was saying, you know, I lived in Westlake Village, but I moved because, you know, it's a sanctuary city and all the illegals are coming in, and, you know, they were coming and they were stealing from people in the neighborhood. And, you know, I moved to Arizona because it's conservative, which is great. And I was standing behind them, having been away from the US for 2 months, working, kind of going on a spiritual vacation and working on myself. And I'm standing there and I'm just like, oh my God, this is what I'm coming back to. And
Put the mic a little closer to your
okay,
mouth.
sorry. And so then we get on the plane and I kind of just, you know, like, and I end up sitting next to her. And so I'm texting my partner. I'm like, she's like, well, what would Trudy do? What would Jack do? You know, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and we're saying that. She's like, change your seat. And I'm like, no, because this is a test. This is for me to put into practice all that I've been doing for the past 2 months. And I'm going to take it as a test, and I'm going to look at how I can kind of work through this and be compassionate in a way that she's not, and not fall into the same biases that she's falling into in separation. And of course, I have a Thich Nhat Hanh book with me, which was very, very helpful. And I pulled a page that's like, basically, racism is our misunderstanding and our unwillingness to listen to each other and our unwillingness to connect to one another. So, you know, I'm sitting there, I'm sending her metta, I'm sending her Reiki, you know, I'm doing everything. And I'm also a very highly sensitive person. So I can tell where, in a certain way, where she's toxic, you know, where she's kind of engaging in conversation, but to compete, or to, you know, in these ways where I kind of just set boundaries. And I realize that setting boundaries is really important to being compassionate. And all of this is going on in my head in the plane. And at one point I get up to go to the bathroom and I come back and my neck pillow is gone. So I start going into this neurotic pattern, like, she stole it, like, you know, it's her. And then I just kind of calm myself. At one point I was watching an Almodovar film, which I don't know if you guys know Almodovar. He's queer and Spanish and crazy. And I was laughing, and there's all these drag queens on the screen, and she's like, what movie are you watching? And I'm like, Almodovar, he's amazing. You definitely have to watch him. Thinking in my head, I hope she does, because it is the opposite of conservatism. And I mean, he's post-Franco, you know, I mean, he's like queer and celebratory and everything I believe in. But so then at the end of it, I come back to my seat after going through this. She took my neck thing, she threw it away, like, and I mentioned, oh, I don't know where my neck thing is. And then she was like, oh, maybe it's here. I was like, oh, maybe I dropped it in the aisle and they took it away. So, you know, I'm sending her metta. Something happened with her friend where they came and they took her away because her friend on the plane wasn't doing well. So at a certain point, I felt bad for her that she had to go through this thing with whatever it was. And then towards the end of the flight, she comes back, she gets up to go to the restroom, and she comes back and she goes, here's your neck pillow. And so at that point, I felt like all the metta I had done had worked, because we had bridged this gap where I realized, and I understood that I was also using this situation to unravel my own neuroses about her and about, you know, the white other, that, you know, we all kind of, the racist white other, that we also have biases towards ourselves. And if we continue to have these biases towards the other, we're never going to get anywhere. And being able to use this practice as a way to practice compassion in action towards someone who maybe we don't think is even deserving of our compassion. But I feel like these are the only ways that we're going to unravel the biases that keep us separate in ourselves first.
Thank you so much.
Indeed.
You and the gentleman who spoke previously, it's really a tribute to what's possible with the practice, that you didn't get up and move. And you didn't really talk to her straight on about things, but you communicated in a way that was loving, and it had a result. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Indeed, the power is in one. The power is in one.
Yes. Where else could it be? But then together.
I tell people all the time, if you consider all of the people on the face of this planet, how few you as an individual are going to come into contact with in your entire life, I believe we're all connected. It's specific to our connection, as though all of us in this room at this moment are connected. The power of one. You have to learn to live in the moment, each moment, and follow what's deepest within you, because that's the Creator speaking to you directly. Maybe a still, small voice, but that means you have to be still to receive it. He will illuminate your path. Otherwise, you don't know where to step. When he illuminates the path, then you know where to step and how to step.
That's why we meditate.
Exactly. That's why we're all here.
And in this
and like attracts like.
Well,
like
yes.
attracts like. We are all
Yes.
one. And it is the power is in one.
Thank you.
I am rising.
And maybe you want to run for office. We'll vote for you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And, I just want to say, because the language is a little different in our tradition, like we don't talk about creator, God, but it's the same. It really is the same. We just don't use language that could be understood to personify whatever we call the love and intelligence in the universe. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
You for a lovely talk. I wonder if you could speak to sort of, there's certain issues like politically that are really easy, I think, for all of us to be on board together against.
Yes.
Then there's the other issues that can seem interpretations of Dharma or even other political issues that could divide a community like this, and like how to navigate that seems challenging. If you could speak to that at all.
Yeah, I will speak to that. I'll speak to that by just referring back to a teaching that comes from the Buddhist tradition, from the Buddha, where there was a community of monastics who were practicing together just the way we are, except they were also living together, and they had taken vows of celibacy, and they were only eating one meal a day, so they were doing a more intensive kind of awareness practice, and they weren't getting along. And this was a community that was his community. They were around him, and they were just like quarreling and arguing with each other and just getting very polarized. And the way that he dealt with it at that time was he left, and he went into the forest and meditated, and he stayed away for a few months. And for them, it was so shocking that their leader had just basically said, you know what, I can't help you if you're going to do this. I can't help you. That they, of course, looked at themselves and reformed. And so that was one thing. But then there was another visit where he visited a community where people were really getting along well and living very harmoniously together. And he asked them, like, how are you doing this? Like, how, you're living in such close proximity and practicing intensely, and it's sort of a crucible that could bring up a lot of conflict, and mostly it brings up our reactive emotions. Like when I think about their eating only one meal a day, I have reactive emotions that come up. If I had to sit with a certain teacher. I'm just continuing the food analogy, but to sit with a certain teacher, this Burmese master U Pandita, we couldn't eat anything after, I think it was 11:30 in the morning. So we could have breakfast and we could have lunch. But that was it. And then they would take away even the milk you would put in your coffee, so that you couldn't like make some mixture of milk and honey or something when you were feeling desperate. Anyway, you have feelings when you do practices that push your buttons. And so he was asking them, how are you getting along? How do you manage? And they basically said something like what the previous lady was saying, which is that they said, we practice loving kindness. They practice metta. And the way that we do that is when we want something, we actually look at how is that going to affect the other people? And if somebody else wants something, we practice, like let's say Izumi wants something and I want something else, I will practice giving Izumi what she wants. But they were doing that very deliberately. So I think there's lots of ways to handle conflict, and some of them are obviously more skillful than others. And so this practice is really about, or very much like what you were sharing from the airplane too. It's very much about trying to rein in the destructive tendencies that we have to react, in a punitive way, or we want to get revenge or things like that. To rein in those tendencies and to consciously, again, here's where the awareness and consciousness part comes in, to consciously cultivate acting in a different way, a way that will support harmony and understanding, even if it's not going to solve the differences. We're always going to have differences with each other, but we don't have to hate each other and fight with each other about our differences. And part of it, I think, is also being able to name the differences, because I was brought up that it's impolite to name differences. I don't know if this was just something from when I was brought up, because that's when I was brought up, but my parents taught us that, but they taught us something that is completely the opposite today, which is basically we don't see color. We're all equal. And today, that's like a really mistaken, pretty much racist thing to say, because it's not true. It's just not true. It's not authentic. And so I think being able to name the differences and have the courage to talk them over in an appropriate setting. I'm not sure being trapped in an airplane seat next to each other was the appropriate setting, for example. I don't know. It would really depend on your confidence level in having a difficult conversation. But to name the differences is important, and it's okay. It has to be okay, or we really won't be able to find a way to make it work. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if does that address I can't tell from your face. I think you have something. Let me ask you, why are you asking this question? What does it mean to you?
Well, being in different sitting groups, sometimes, certain, people use the sitting group as a platform to talk about maybe what I would see as a fringe political issue, or other maybe a political issue that I agree with, but other ways see and kind of see a wider range of
I'm
points
so glad I
on it.
asked you.
Honestly, I don't really want to provide the 4 examples now, because I don't want to
You don't have to.
Yeah.
You don't have to. I get it. No, I didn't understand where you were coming from.
Yeah.
I think that as a nonprofit, we shouldn't, be supporting political candidates or telling people who to vote for. It's illegal, actually, even though people do it all the time. And in a perfect world, I wouldn't maybe voice my beliefs or opinions, but would simply present the Dharma teachings. And there's something really to be said for that, because I want everybody to feel welcome here, even if their political even if they feel like the lady in Orange County, I want them to feel welcome to learn the practice. And because I trust that once people start to practice, their minds will open, right? But I just want to say personally, given what's happened since 2016, I just can't stay silent. I'm Jewish. I'm a white cisgender but Jewish woman. I can't stay silent.
I agree. There's like this certain issues I feel like are great that are brought up in the terms of things. It's just then there's other issues that are subtle and or I don't know. They just I mean for me race issues and class issues is like a no-brainer in terms of Buddhism, and just sometimes there's like I don't know I've been in groups where people start going off about chemtrails, and I'm like,
oh
you know,
yeah,
and,
oh yeah.
and then it can become like
it's a slippery slope. It's true. It's
yeah.
true. But I feel like, oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please put the mic so the live stream people can hear you.
Okay, yeah, no, that's it. That's
yeah. Do you want to add? You have to use the mic so the live stream can hear.
I have very complicated thoughts, obviously. So I don't know. It's something it's hard to speak about because I'm still trying. It's not because I'm trying to hide anything.
You're in process.
Censor. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know.
Yeah.
But maybe it's also my generation. So I was born and raised in Santa Monica, and I left Santa Monica after college, moved to the other side of LA, recently moved back to the west side, and there is kind of there's a shared set of root values that I have with a lot of the culture on this side of town, and I don't, or in certain groups, but then there's little things that I'm trying to learn to accept. I'm trying to figure out how to. I'm nervous talking about this.
Well, let me give it a try. Does this help? I think what you're saying is, while you share many of the values, I don't think you want to be subsumed into some sort of group think, like where everybody's agreeing with everybody about them. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'm saying this as someone who grew up with a lot of privilege. There are a lot of progressive values that I share at the root with people in environments like this, but they're still colored by a sense of privilege that I notice so subtly. And and I'm not aware. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not guilty of this as well, but and it's something that I always joke about, like, you know, like I'll just be like, oh, that's such a Santa Monica thing to say, like, you know, but I'm judging my root. This is where I was born and raised, you know, this is where I come from. But I do see, you know, people have like this thing with the intentions. Think people have the best intentions in the world, but they can still cause harm, and even things that are said in this room today, you know, with the best intentions were kind of hurtful to me, and I don't really need to get into it, but
I think it's important.
Yeah.
Actually.
And
you don't need to get into it today, but for example, if it makes you feel like you can't come back, that's terrible. And so it's important.
And I was thinking about that, but I like to have a plurality of experiences, and I have other sitting groups, and they have different perspectives, and I don't agree with all of their perspectives either, and I'm really trying to come to terms with where everyone's at, and not try to judge, because I think what happens is I hear people saying things that I might feel quick to judge, but then I have to sit back and be like, why am I judging this? Like, I'm still stereotyping my own people, kind of, you know, and I need to sit with that, but then yeah, it's hard. It's so complicated.
I think it's also what you're talking about. We would say in Buddhist practice is the first noble truth. Nothing is perfect.
Yeah.
Each sitting group has its strengths and weaknesses. We don't always address these issues. This came up in something I was thinking about in relation to a question last week. You know, it's different actually every week, but I think that there's no perfect anything.
Yeah.
Sitting group, relationship, anything.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could say everything is perfect just as it is. So we have to either say yes to everything in a practice, from a practice perspective, meditation perspective, we actually would say yes to everything or no to everything. And the no would be, this isn't it, this isn't it, this isn't it. Not that it's bad or wrong, but that we can't fixate any one place and say, this is it forever and ever, because it doesn't last. As I was saying earlier, the context shifts and changes all the time. This is the truth of anicca, of impermanence. So from that perspective, I really appreciate your honesty, and you're looking at where you say yes, where you say no, why. I didn't grow up here, but I feel at home here. I came here because my mom was in this area. Probably might have chosen to live on the other side of town. I don't know. But anyway, I'm here, so I work with being here. But I think that what I most want to appreciate is the awareness, the mindfulness that you're bringing to your own mind and heart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks for turning it over so she could have a voice too. You know what? We actually need to stop. Let's sit for a minute. We're coming to the end of our morning together. So at the end of a period of study and practice of the teachings together, we express our appreciation and our gratitude for any way that they've been of benefit by offering the goodness of our practice to all beings everywhere without exception. Whatever goodness arises from studying and practicing together, we share, we offer in the deepest wish that we and all beings will continue to grow in love and wisdom and understanding. So I want to thank you, everybody, for hanging in there today. It was a little different from other days, and I appreciate your participation, honesty, and presence very much. Live stream folks, I'm guessing there was no question. Even if you didn't have questions, you can still press the donate button. I want to remind you of that. And everybody here, we have an alms bowl out in the lobby, and you can donate there to keep our center and our teachers and our teachings going. And before you leave, just say hi to somebody that you haven't met before. Say hello. And I'll see you next week.